Hey, what's up guys? Brian from Zombie Guitar here. Here in this lesson I want to show you how you can take basic major and minor chords in either the open position or in their bar chord form, and you can make simple manipulations to these chords in order to make more interesting chords by adding extensions. So we're going to be looking at 7th chords and 9th chords in this lesson, and then I'm going to show you how to know which chords to use within a key in order to remain diatonic to whichever key you're playing in. So all that stuff's coming up. Before we get started, make sure to take a look at my website, zombieguitar.com. It's the year 2020 now. I have lots of new things planned for this year. I've been working on this site for about 4 years now, 4.5 years, and I don't plan on stopping anytime soon. So if you haven't already checked it out, check it out, zombieguitar.com. Let's get started. Alright, so for the purposes of this lesson, we're going to be just making simple manipulations to basic major chords and minor chords, whether the chords are played in open position or in their bar chord form. So we're just going to be looking at 3 intervals that are going to be the manipulations that we're doing. So you have the major 7th interval, you have the 7th interval, and then you have the 9th interval. So a major 7th interval is always going to be found 1/2 step below the root of the chord. A 7 interval without the major in front of it is always going to be found 1 whole step below the root of the chord, whatever chord it is. And then the 9th interval is going to be found 1 whole step above, or 1 whole step higher than the root. All right, so if you can remember those 3 things, you can take any major or minor chord anywhere on the entire neck of the fretboard, and as long as you know where the root of that chord is for whatever shape you're playing, you can add either a major 7th to it, you can add a 7th to it, or you can add a 9th to it, or combinations of the two. So let's look at all the different types of chords that we can do by making these simple alterations. Alright, so first let's take a look at major 7th chords. So a major 7th chord has the chord formula 1, 3, 5, 7. And as I said, major 7th interval is just 1/2 step lower than the root. So if I wanted to make a C major 7, I would just take a C major chord, and then I would add in the major 7th interval, which is 1/2 step lower than the root. So let's try to do it here. Let's take a C major chord in the open position. So I know my root note is C. I have to find the note that is 1/2 step lower than C. So 1/2 step lower than C would be B. You have a B here on the 2nd fret of the A string. I also have a C up here on the 1st fret of the B string. 1 less than that would be the note B. So I'm going to add the B there on the open B string. So instead of playing a C major like this, I'm lifting up my 1st finger and playing this. Alright, so I could do the same thing if I wanted to manipulate a bar chord form. So let's play the C major chord in the bar chord form here, like this. So I know my C's here, my root note is here, 3rd fret of the A string. I also know I have a root note here, 5th fret of the G string. So I'm going to lower that by 1/2 step, the one on the G string. So instead of playing this, I'm going to play this. So that's how you get a major 7th chord. You just take a chord, a major chord, in its either open shape or in a bar chord shape, and you find the root that you want to lower 1/2 step. More often than not, the chord shapes that you're playing are going to have more than one root because these chords span across multiple strings. So find where the root notes are, pick which root note within the chord shape that you want to lower by 1/2 step, lower by 1/2 step. The result is a major 7th chord. There's also such things as minor major 7th chords. That's where you take a minor chord, such as A minor or G minor or F minor or something like that, and then you add the major 7th interval to that chord as well. the major seventh interval is still going to be found 1/2 step lower than the root of whichever minor chord you are adding the interval to, and the result is going to be a minor, it's going to be called a minor major seventh chord. All right, so the minor triad, and then the major seven is, the additional interval that's 1/2 step lower than the root. All right, so I'm not going to really go into that chord in this lesson. That you're going to find those chords used when you're, harmonizing the harmonic minor scale and stuff like that. But that's beyond the scope of this lesson. So for this lesson, let's just stick with the major seventh chords and the major seven interval being applied to major triads. All right, so the next type of chord we're going to look at is going to be called a seventh chord, otherwise known as the dominant chord. The chord formula for this chord is 1, 3, 5, flat 7. All right, so for this chord, you're just taking a major triad and then you're adding a flat 7 to it, or just the 7. All right, so the flat 7, that is 1 whole step lower than the root. When you have a major 7, like we talked about previously, that's 1/2 step below the root. A 7, when you just see 7 in the chord symbol without the word major in front of it, that's 1 whole step below the root. All right, so let's try and make a C7 chord, or a C dominant 7 chord. So you have the note C, or you have your C major chord here. So I have to figure out how to fit a B flat into here somehow, because B flat is 1 whole step lower than the C. So here's your note C. Here's a B flat on the first fret of the A string. That same note can also be found on the 3rd fret of the G string. So that's where I'm going to add my 7th. So I have my C major chord, and then I'm going to put my pinky down there, and that's where I find that flat 7. You'll know when you found your flat 7 because it has that bluesy sound to it. All right, so in the last part, we manipulated a C major bar chord and made it a C major 7 chord like this. So instead of lowering that C that's found here on the 5th fret of the G string by 1/2 step, let's lower it by 1 whole step. So here's a C7 like this. Okay, you could do this to this C bar chord too. So you just have to find where your C's are. So my root note is here on the E string, 8th fret. I also have one on the 10th fret D string. That's the one I'm going to lower. So I'm going to take the 10th fret D string, lower that by 1 whole step. I can do that by lifting up my pinky. So I have a C7 that way, or a C dominant 7 that way. All right, and then I could also add my pinky up here too, because that's the same note as this note here. So I could go and add in a 7th here as well. So those are dominant chords. You just take your major triad and you add that flat 7, which is found 1 whole step lower than the root, and then the result is a 7th chord or a dominant 7th chord. All right, so the next type of chord we're going to look at is going to be a minor 7th chord. So a minor 7th chord is the chord formula 1 flat 3, 5 flat 7. So this is just a minor triad with a flat 7th added onto it. This is the same flat 7th that we looked at in the previous section. That is 1 whole step lower than the root. So you take a minor triad and then you add in an additional interval that's 1 whole step lower than the root. So let's take an A minor chord here. Find our root note, which is A. Here's the open A string here, and then you're in 2nd fret G string. So 1 whole step lower than the 2nd fret of the G string would be the open string. So I can just lift up my 3rd finger, and the result is an A minor 7 chord. Or I can take this A minor chord like this, and I could find my root notes. So I have root note 5th fret low E string, 7th fret of the D string. So I'm going to go with that one. So I'm just going to lift my pinky up because that'll give me 1 whole step lower. So and then I can do the same thing since I already know where my 7th is, which is right there. It's the same note as this up here. So I can go ahead and add in my pinky like that. So that's a minor 7th chord. So you just take a minor triad, you add in a note, an additional note that's one whole step lower than the root. The result is a minor 7th chord. All right, so now we're going to start looking at nines. So as I said, the 9 comes from the 2nd octave. So looking at the C major scale in 2 octaves, your root, 3rd, and 5th, that's what makes the triad. That's what makes the major triad, the C major triad. If you wanted to get a 9, you would count up 9 notes. The note is D. That would be your 9. All right, so the 9 is also the same thing as the 2. So when we get to sus2 chords, you're going to see that it's the same thing as a 9. All right, but just keep in mind that when the triad's in place and then you're adding additional higher notes than the triad, it's called the 9, and that comes from the 2nd octave. So the first one we're going to look at is simply an add 9 chord. So that's where you just take your triad and then you add a 9. So the 9, as I said, it's found easily. It's found one whole step higher than the root, and you can add that to either major triads or minor triads, and the result is a add 9 chord. So let's make some major add 9s and minor add 9 chords. So let's make a C add 9. So take your C major chord. So I have to somehow add a note that's one whole step higher than the root. The root is C. That's 3rd fret A string. Your root, or the 9 would be the note D. All right, so that's found there. You also have a D note up here, 3rd fret of the B string. So I'm going to just put my pinky down and make a C add 9 like that. All right, so I could also make I could take a C major chord like this. I could just play the high 4 strings of the C major chord. And then I could recognize that my root notes are found here on the 10th fret of the D string and then on the 8th fret of the high E string. So I'm going to add the 9 up here on the high E string. So 2 notes higher than the 8th fret would be the 10th fret. So here's a C add 9 like this. And you can move back and forth between the two. Okay, pretty easy. You just figure out where the 9 is, you figure out that note that's one whole step higher than the root, and then you just add it to the triad. So let's try to make a minor 9 chord. So let's take an A minor chord. Let's do an A minor in the open position. So I have to somehow figure out how to get a B in here, because here's your note A, open A string. One whole step higher than the note A is the note B. So there's the note B up here also on the 4th fret of the G string. So instead of playing this A here on the 2nd fret of the G string, I'm going to remove that finger and put my pinky down here. So this one's a little bit tough to play. It's a bit of a stretch, but this is an A minor add 9. So I could make an E minor add 9. Here's an E minor chord. All right, so 9 is going to be found one whole step higher than the root note. So my root note is E. So I have to add an F sharp. Here's an F sharp up here, 2nd fret of the high E string. So I can play an E minor add 9 like this. I could take an A minor chord like this and just play the high 4 strings. Sounds like the beginning of Stairway to Heaven. And then just take my pinky and put that up here on the B, which is the 7th fret of the high E string. So that's add 9 chords. You just take the triad, whether it's a major triad or the minor triad, and then you just add a 9. The 9 is one whole step higher than the root. So next we're going to look at major 9. So if you see something like C major 9 or G major 9 or D major 9 or even A minor major 9, B minor major 9 or something like that, what that's telling you is that you have a major 7th chord already in place and then you're adding a 9 on top of that. So the chord formula, we're not going to look at minor major nines for this lesson, just like we're not going to look at minor major sevenths because that's beyond the context. You don't really find that in diatonic major and minor keys. So we're just going to look at major nine chords. So C major nine, G major nine, B major nine, things like that. So the chord formula for that would be 1, 3, 5, 7, 9. So you have a major triad. That's your foundation. You then have that major seventh interval added in there. And the major seventh interval is found 1 half step below the root. And then you're adding the 9. The 9 is going to be 1 whole step higher than the root. All right, so some of these chords, they're going to be very tricky to play, especially when you add even more intervals on top of that. So you can start dropping certain intervals out if you want. And the first one to go is always going to be the 5th. So if you're trying to figure out how to make these chord shapes up and you realize you only have 4 fingers, but you're trying to add, 5 notes or more than that into it, you can always drop the 5th. Okay, because the root, the 3rd, which determines the quality, whether it's major or minor, then the 7th, that's that major 7th sound or that dominant 7th sound. Dominant 7th sounds bluesy, major 7th sounds, I guess, jazzy, whatever, however you want to describe it. And then the 5th doesn't really add to the quality, or the 5th is just, it doesn't matter, let it go. So let's go ahead and try and make some major 9th chords. So let's take a C major chord. All right, so I have my note C here, 3rd fret. I know that I have to get the note D in there somehow. I also know that I have to get the note B in there somehow because that's that major 7th. So here's my note C. Here's its 3rd. I can add my note B here, 4th fret of the G string. And then I have to get that note D in there, so there's the note D, 3rd fret of the B string, so this would be a C major 9. Notice that this is only 4 notes. I have the root, the 3rd, the major 7th, and the 9. And I'm just dropping the 5th because you can do that. So this is a C major 9 chord. I'm going to leave this up to you if you want to take, other major chords and other bar chord forms and do this yourself. That would be a good exercise. The root, the major 3rd, get that major 7th in there, and then, fit that 9 in there. Putting all those things together, the result is a major 9 chord. All right, so try to do it with some bar chord shapes and see what you come up with. So the next type of chord is going to be a dominant 9 chord. This has the chord formula root, 3rd, 5th, flat 7, 9. So this is just a dominant 7th chord, major triad, flat 7, 1 whole step lower than the root, and then adding that 9. So you take a dominant chord, C7 or G7 or B7 or something like that, and then you add the 9 on top of it. The result is a dominant 9 chord. All right, so let's go ahead and try to make a C dominant 9 chord. So starting off on our C major chord. So we know we have our root, 3rd. So I need to add a B flat in there because that's that dominant 7 interval or the flat 7 interval. So B flat can also be found up here on the 3rd fret of the G string. So here's our C7. Notice how I just have the root, 3rd, and the flat 7 at this point. I don't need the 5th. You still get the sound. You can still tell it's a C7 chord, so that's why we can drop the 5th. So then we're going to add our 9. So we know that our 9 in relation to C is the note D. So here's our here's our C9 chord, or our C dominant 9 chord. So that's a dominant 9 chord. Again, take some of your basic major bar chord forms and try to make a dominant 9 chord. Just take a dominant chord, whatever your favorite way of playing a dominant chord is. I actually have a lesson called how to make 10 different dominant 7th chords out of cage shapes. So take a look at that lesson. I'll post that below. And then, take those shapes and then figure out where the 9 is and then just add that 9 in there and then figure out how to make some cool dominant 9 variations. So the next type of chord we're going to look at is a minor 9 chord. So the chord formula for a minor 9 chord is root, flat 3, 5, flat 7, 9. So this is just simply a minor 7th chord with a 9 added to it. So as we already looked at, a minor 7th chord is a minor triad with a flat 7 added to it. So that is, the 7th is one whole step lower than the root, and then you just add the 9. So let's try to make up some minor 9 chords. So let's start with this A minor bar chord here. So I know that I can make an A minor 7th out of this by simply lifting up my pinky, because my pinky is falling on the note A. Lifting that up, my first finger will then be taking care of the 5th fret of the D string, so that's an A minor 7. And I know I have to add in a B somehow, so I can find a B up here on the 7th fret of the high E string. That's the note that's one whole step higher than the note A. So I have my A minor 7 chord, and then I'm adding this 9 to it, resulting in an A minor 9 chord. Reminds me of a Red Hot Chili Peppers song. I can't remember exactly which song it is, but I know they use that chord in it. So try and take different minor chord shapes and then add this flat 7 in there, resulting in a minor 7th chord, and then add the 9 to the minor 7th, resulting in a minor 9 chord. So the last chord we're going to look at is a sus2 chord, and the chord formula for a sus2 chord is root 2 5, or 1 2 5. So basically for a sus2 chord, the 2 is the same thing as the 9, as I already pointed out. So that note is going to be one whole step higher than the root, and you're simply just replacing the 3rd. So the difference between major chords and minor chords is that a major chord has a major 3rd interval, a minor chord has a minor 3rd interval. So you're getting rid of the 3rd completely, leaving the chord not having any major or minor quality, just like power chords, and then you're adding in this 2. So it doesn't matter if it's a major chord or a minor chord, that 2 is always going to be found one whole step higher than the root. So when you have a sus2 chord, you're completely eliminating any major or minor quality of the chord, and you're making an interesting sounding sus2 chord, which I'm sure you're familiar with. So let's go ahead and make some sus2 chords. Let's try to make a C sus2. So start out with a C major chord in the open position. Find your 3rd, or you can either find your 3rd and remove it, or you can just figure out which note you need to add by finding the root and going one whole step higher. So we know that this 2 interval is one whole step higher than the root. So our root is C, one whole step higher is the note D. So 5th fret A string is the note D, open D string is the note D. So lifting my middle finger up off that string, here's a C major, here's a C sus2. I know that I have a D up here on the B string, 3rd fret, so I can play that too. That would also be a C sus2. I can do the same thing to minor chords. I could take, say, I want to play a D minor chord. If I knew that first I have to know that I'm trying to add an E to it, because D is the root. One whole step higher than the note D is the note E. So I have to find the 3rd and replace it with the note E. So here is the 3rd up here, F. F is the 3rd of the D minor chord. And I want to replace that with the note E, which is the open E string. So I could have made that same manipulation to a D major chord. Here's a D major chord. So the 2nd fret is the 2nd fret is the note F sharp, 2nd fret of the E string. That would be my 3rd of the D major chord. But I'm getting rid of the 3rd and I'm adding in that 2nd interval, which is again the note E. So here's a D sus2 again. So you can't tell that that is the D sus2. You can't tell if it came from a major or a minor chord. You just know that it's the root is D, and then you're adding that sus2 to it. So you can do this to any bar chords too. I like to do it to bar chords rooted on the E string. So say I wanted to take an E minor chord, for example. Here's an E minor chord rooted on the A string. I know that I somehow have to fit the note F sharp into this because that would be one whole step higher than the root. So I know I have an F sharp here. So here's my E minor. My third is found here, 8th fret of the B string. So just lifting up my third, I'll be left with that F sharp note. Alright, so sus2 chords have that very open sound to them. So you just basically take a major triad or a minor triad, it doesn't matter. Get rid of the third, replace it with that 2, which we have previously called the 9 up until now. The result is a sus2 chord. So the final part of this lesson is going to be about how to make diatonic chord progressions using these extended chords. So I made another lesson, it's called Understanding Diatonic Chord Progressions. That shows you how you derive chords from the key scale in order to make the 7 diatonic chords that are found within a key. For this lesson, I'm just going to give you kind of a shortcut, and you can just kind of, look at what I say is going to work. If you really want to dive deeper into it and where these chords are actually derived from, take a look at that lesson, which I'll link you to below. But, I always like to use my circle of fifths to help me out. So let's take the key of C major / A minor, relative major minor pair. The circle of fifths groups the major and minor chords that are found in a key into a grouping of 6 like so. So within this particular key signature, C major, A minor, you have 3 major chords, 3 minor chords. So if you want to make those chords into their 7th form while still remaining diatonic to the key, meaning that all the notes that you use are part of the overall key scale of the key of C major / A minor, same key, some chords are going to become major 7th chords, some chords are going to become minor 7th chords, and then you're always going to have a dominant 7th chord within the key. So your 1 chord and 4 chord are always going to become major 7th chords. 1 chord is always going to be outer circle middle. 4 chord is always going to be outer circle counterclockwise position. So those 2 chords always become major 7th chords. And then the 3 minor chords, they always become minor 7th chords. Those to remain diatonic to the key. And then the 5 chord, which is outer circle clockwise position, that always becomes a dominant 7th chord. So within the key of C major, you have a C major 7, you have a D minor 7, you have an E minor 7, you have an F major 7, you have a G dominant 7, and then you have an A minor 7. Those are all diatonic to the key of C major / A minor. You then have a 7th chord, which we're not talking about for now because that 7th chord is actually it's called a half diminished chord. But I do go into that chord in the lesson that I linked you to below about diatonic chord progressions. So that's diatonic 7th chords for any given key. And then you can go ahead and you can add your 9s now. So it doesn't matter if you're adding a 9 to a major chord or a minor chord, the 9 is still just one whole step higher than the root. All right, so that would be the same thing if you called it 2. So when you're using your circle of fifths, all of the chords except for 1 have a diatonic 9 interval or a diatonic 2 interval in it, and every one except for the 3 chord. So the 3 chord is found in the inner circle in the clockwise position. That's the only chord that you can't add a 9 to it and remain diatonic. So if you try and add a note that's one whole step higher than the note E minor is your 3 chord, that would be the note F sharp. F sharp is not found in the key of C major / A minor. Therefore, that you can't do that 9 or you can't make sus2s out of that particular chord if you want to stay in the key. So all the other chords, if you go and add a 9 or you make a sus2 out of it, then you can, it is part of the key. So given that information, let's take a look at all the different possible chords that you can make out of these chords while still remaining in key. So for the 1 chord, you can make a major chord, you can make a major 7th chord, you can make a major 9th chord, you can make an add 9th chord, and you can make a sus2 chord. Any of those chords will work, keeping you right in this key. Everything will be diatonic. For the 2 chord, you can have a minor chord, you can have a minor 7th chord, you can have a minor 9th chord, you can have an add 9 chord, like a D minor add 9, and you can have a sus2 chord, and all that's fine. So you have 5 possibilities for that chord. So the 3 chord, you can make a minor chord, you can make a minor 7th chord, and you can't really do much with the 9ths because that 9 is not part of the key. So you can't make a sus2 out of this, you can't do an add 9, so you only have 2 possibilities for the 3 chord. So the 4 chord, you can make a major chord, you can make a major 7th chord, you can make a major 9th chord, you can make an add 9 chord, and you can make a sus2 chord. So you have 5 possibilities for that one. All right, so then you have the 5 chord. So the 5 chord, you can make a major chord, you can make a dominant 7th chord, you can make a dominant 9th chord, you can make an add 9 chord, and you can make a sus2 chord. So again, 5 possibilities. And then the 6th chord, you also have 5 possibilities: minor chord, minor 7th, minor 9, add 9, sus2. So those are all the possible chords that you can use for each one of the chords that are in the key, as long as you know what the chord function is, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or 6. Depending on which chord function is, you have now a whole chart of possibilities for chords that you can use to make your chord progressions sound more interesting. So just apply the simple rules to these basic major and minor bar chord shapes, or open shapes for major and minor chords, and then, go ahead and make some chord progressions out of it. So that's going to do it for this lesson. Thanks for watching. See you next time.